Have you ever locked eyes with someone you've never met, and something inside you just knew? Not attraction, not chemistry, something older. As if your soul had turned a corner and suddenly remembered a face it had never seen before. Science tells us about hormones and pheromones. Psychology breaks down attachment styles and compatibility. But some connections go deeper, so deep they can't be explained by anything we can measure or prove. They feel fated. This kind of connection doesn't feel like meeting someone new. It feels like coming home. And what's fascinating is that Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist known for diving into the depths of the unconscious, actually had a name for this kind of experience. While most psychological models tend to label it fantasy or projection, Jung took a radically different approach. He believed these profound, almost mystical connections between people weren't illusions at all, but invitations from the psyche itself. According to Jung, relationships like this are deeply tied to a process he called individuation, a kind of inner evolution where we become whole by integrating all the fragmented parts of ourselves. These rare and powerful soul connections, they're not here to complete us like some romantic fairy tale. They're here to awaken us. In this video, we're going to explore the psychology behind these deep, destined connections, why they feel so intense, so familiar, so hard to explain. We'll look at Jung's concept of the anima and animus, the archetype of the divine couple, and why meeting a destined soul often marks the beginning of the most transformative chapter in your inner life. So, if you've ever had a connection that felt like more than coincidence, like it was written somewhere beyond time, keep watching. This might just help you make sense of what you've always felt, but never had words for. At the very center of Jung's explanation for soul-level connections lies two powerful psychological forces, the anima and the animus. These are the unconscious, inner counterparts that exist within each of us. For men, the anima is the inner feminine aspect. For women, the animus is the inner masculine. But this isn't just about gender, it's about energy, balance, and wholeness. These inner figures shape what we're drawn to in others, not just who we're attracted to on the surface, but what kind of energy feels like home even if we don't consciously understand why. When someone shows up in our lives who embodies the qualities of our anima or animus, when they reflect back to us our inner, unconscious ideals, it creates a kind of soul shock. It's like a tuning fork deep inside us starts to vibrate. The feeling is beyond logical explanation. It's recognition. You don't just feel attracted. You feel seen, sometimes even exposed. It's almost eerie how much this person seems to understand you, even though they just arrived in your life. Jung described this kind of recognition as numinous, a word that suggests sacredness, mystery, and awe. It feels holy, ancient. And it's not because of the person alone, it's because something deep in your unconscious is waking up. Time slows. The outside world fades. It feels like the start of something huge. But it's not just a love story, it's a psyche story. Something archetypal is coming alive. Jung believed that these rare connections stir the collective unconscious, the vast, shared reservoir of symbols, images, and energies that all humans carry. And when the right two people meet, that unconscious comes to the surface. It starts moving, speaking, guiding. These aren't just two people dating or getting to know each other. These are two psyches, two inner worlds, engaging in an ancient, symbolic dance. This is where we meet the archetype of the divine couple, what Jung called the sacred union of opposites. Across history, every culture has told stories about this. Shiva and Shakti, Osiris and Isis, Eros and Psyche. These aren't just myths, they're maps. They show us something universal about what it means to come together, not just physically or emotionally, but spiritually. When two people mirror this archetype, their connection feels larger than life. It carries a weight that ordinary relationships don't. And it's why so many people who experience this kind of bond say things like it felt meant to be, or it was inevitable. But here's the part that's easy to miss. Jung warned that just activating this archetype, just feeling this soul-level recognition, isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. This powerful connection isn't a sign that you've found the one and now everything will be easy. It's a sign that you've entered a psychological portal. The divine couple isn't a perfect fairy tale, it's a symbol of your potential. And what comes next is the real work. Because after the magic of recognition comes the mirror. The deep, often uncomfortable process of seeing yourself more clearly than ever before. And that leads us straight into part 2 of this journey: projection and shadow work in destined connections. But before we get there, let's take a breath. It's easy to romanticize these kinds of experiences, to imagine that soulmates mean no more pain, no more uncertainty, no more longing. But Jung teaches us something much more powerful than fantasy. These connections aren't here to complete us. They're here to transform us. So if you've ever felt like someone entered your life and everything changed, if you felt like you knew them before you even spoke, it's not just in your head. It's in your soul. It's in your psyche. And maybe, just maybe, it's in your destiny. So you've met someone who feels like a mirror to your soul. Everything about the connection feels surreal, like the universe orchestrated the meeting. But here's what Jung would say next. Now the real work begins. The intensity you feel, the sense of this person sees me like no one else ever has. That isn't just coincidence. That's projection. Carl Jung described projection as the unconscious process, where we place our own hidden traits, wounds, and desires onto someone else. It's like our psyche holds up a movie screen, and the other person becomes the character we've cast for a role we never even knew we wrote. In everyday relationships, we all project to some degree. But in destined connections, those soul-deep, psyche-shaking encounters, projection isn't just strong, it's amplified. It's like the volume on your unconscious gets turned up to 11. You don't just see someone attractive or compatible, you see your missing piece. You see who you've longed to become. You see your hidden pain, your buried strengths, your unlived dreams in them. And the wild thing, they're doing the same to you. This is where it gets tricky, because it's not just about falling in love. It's about facing your shadow. Jung's idea of the shadow refers to all the parts of ourselves we've repressed, denied, or disowned: our fears, our shame, our desires that didn't feel acceptable growing up. The shadow isn't evil, it's simply the parts of you that live outside the spotlight of your conscious awareness. In a destined connection, the other person doesn't just trigger attraction. They activate the shadow. They awaken parts of you that were buried for a reason, and suddenly, they're out in the open. Ever feel like this person knows exactly how to touch the deepest wounds you didn't even know you had? That's not by accident. Jung would say it's because their unconscious recognizes yours. You're not just falling for a person. You're encountering the medicine for your own healing, and sometimes medicine tastes like fire before it becomes relief. This is why destined relationships can be both profoundly healing and painfully raw. One moment you feel seen, known, elevated. The next, you're defensive, triggered, spiraling. The connection pulls you in and pushes you out. It's chaotic, magnetic, and deeply transformative. But none of it is meaningless when someone activates both your longing and your shadow. They are functioning as what Jung called a container for transformation. They're not here just to love you the way you want to be loved. They're here to help you become someone more whole, more integrated, more conscious. And how do they do that? By being a mirror that doesn't just show your light but also your blind spots. It's easy to blame them when we're triggered, to say, they changed, or they hurt me, or they betrayed the magic we had at the beginning. But if we look through Jung's lens, we see something deeper. They mirrored back what we needed to see in ourselves. They showed us the parts that need healing, the old patterns we haven't outgrown, the ways we still abandon ourselves, and that's the gateway to transformation. This is where conscious awareness becomes crucial. Without it, we keep the relationship trapped in a cycle of projection, disillusionment, and disappointment. We idolize them, then we vilify them. We think they're perfect, then we think they're the problem. But what if the real growth lies not in fixing the other person, but in owning what we've projected? What if they didn't betray us, but simply stopped carrying the pieces of ourselves we refuse to claim? Here's something Jung made clear: projection isn't bad. It's inevitable. It's part of how we learn who we are. But projection becomes a problem when we believe it's reality, when we confuse the mirror for the truth. So what's the solution? Shadow work. In the context of a destined connection, shadow work means using the relationship as a path back to yourself. It means asking hard questions. What parts of me did I see in them? What did I believe they were giving me that I haven't given myself? What patterns are repeating from my past? What am I avoiding by focusing all my attention on them? This kind of self-inquiry is uncomfortable, but it's also the only path to real intimacy. Because until you've reclaimed the pieces of yourself you projected, you're not really in relationship with the other person. You're in relationship with your fantasy of them. And here's where the magic really happens. As you begin to reclaim your shadow, as you own your wounds, your desires, your fears, the projection starts to dissolve. The relationship transforms from a battlefield of unconscious patterns into a sacred space for mutual growth. You no longer need them to save you or complete you, and they no longer need to carry your projections. Instead, you meet to whole people, choosing to walk together consciously. But this path isn't linear. In fact, one of the most challenging and essential parts of this journey is what comes next. Separation. Jung saw separation not as failure, but as part of the transformation process. Just like alchemy, where raw materials must be broken down, purified, and restructured, relationships that touch the soul often require space. Why? Because space allows for integration. During intense projection, there's very little room to breathe. Emotions run high, boundaries blur, identity becomes enmeshed. We can lose ourselves in the intensity of it all. Separation gives us a chance to come back to ourselves. It's a sacred pause, a time to digest everything the relationship has stirred up, to reflect, to heal, to grow without needing the other person to hold the mirror. And here's what's even more fascinating. Separation often sets the stage for reunion. Not necessarily in the fairy tale sense, not always in romance, but in a deeper, more conscious meeting of two souls who have faced their own shadows and returned stronger. In many destined connections, this rhythm of meeting, mirroring, separating, and returning is part of the process. It's not dysfunction, it's transformation. Like the alchemical stages, Jung loved to reference conjunction, dissolution, coagulation. These relationships are labs of inner alchemy, and each stage, even the painful ones, plays a role in turning lead into gold. So if you're in the middle of one of these connections or grieving the loss of one, know this. The depth of your pain is not proof that something went wrong. It's proof that something real was happening, something archetypal, something evolutionary. The person may or may not remain in your life, but the transformation they triggered, that's yours to keep. Because in the end, destined connections aren't about possession, they're about reflection. Not about filling your emptiness, but about showing you the fullness that's always been within you, waiting to be seen. Now that we've explored how projection and shadow play out in destined connections, let's talk about where all of this leads. Because these intense, soul-shaking relationships aren't just psychological storms, they're part of something deeper. Something Jung considered the true goal of human development, individuation. So what is individuation? In Jungian psychology, individuation is the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, your most whole, integrated self. It's not about becoming someone else or even a better version of yourself. It's about becoming authentic, reuniting the fragmented parts of your psyche, your ego, your shadow, your inner child, your masculine and feminine energies, and allowing them to exist in harmony. And here's the key. Relationships are often the most powerful triggers for this process. Especially the rare ones, the deep ones, the ones that shake the ground beneath your identity and challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself. In these kinds of connections, we're not just interacting as egos. There's something else at play, something Jung described as a kind of triangle. One person's ego, the other person's ego, and the two selves beneath the surface calling them toward growth. When two people connect at this depth, their unconscious minds, what Jung called the self, the guiding center of the psyche, start to communicate. This unconscious pull begins to stretch the ego, challenge it, expand it. And the ego doesn't like that. The ego wants control. It wants predictability. But the self wants transformation, even if that means shaking things up. This is why, in destined connections, we often feel torn. A part of us feels called toward the person like gravity, and another part, terrified, resisting, trying to rationalize a way out of the chaos. Because deep down, we know this person isn't just someone we like, they're someone who might change us. And they do, sometimes gently, sometimes through intense emotional labor. But over time, They help us confront parts of ourselves we've kept locked away. They serve as a bridge connecting our conscious self to the unconscious realms we couldn't reach alone. That's why it can feel like you're losing a part of yourself when this kind of relationship ends, or even when it takes a pause, because symbolically, that person wasn't just your partner or your crush. They were holding a piece of your psyche in the mirror, and when they go, it can feel like that piece disappears with them. But here's the truth. They never took it from you. They revealed it to you. And once it's revealed, it's yours to reclaim. Jung was deeply influenced by the symbolism of alchemy, those old, mystical texts that spoke of transforming base metals into gold. He believed alchemy was actually a metaphor for psychological transformation, and he applied these ideas to relationships too. In alchemy, transformation doesn't happen all at once. It follows a process: conjunction coming together, dissolution breaking apart, separation distilling what's real, and coagulation creating something new. It's messy, it's non-linear, and it requires heat. That heat, that's your emotional discomfort, the conflict, the longing, the push and pull. It's the fire that burns away what's false and forces what's true to emerge. So when a destined connection goes through a breakup or a difficult phase, it doesn't mean failure. It might mean you've entered the alchemical fire, the phase where both people are being refined, not as a couple, but as individuals. This is why separation is often a sacred part of the process. It allows each person to integrate what's been activated within them, to digest the lessons, to begin forming a clearer sense of self, not based on projection or fantasy, but on truth. And interestingly, after that separation, some destined connections return not out of addiction or unfinished business, but out of clarity, out of shared growth, out of integration. When that happens, the relationship takes on a new form, more mature, more grounded, less about completion, more about co-creation. But even if the connection doesn't come back in physical form, its psychological impact endures. It becomes part of your story, not just romantically but spiritually. It marks a turning point, a moment your soul said, "Wake up, there's more of you to meet." And if you accept the invitation, what awaits isn't a perfect love story. It's something much more powerful. It's wholeness. It's the realization that the person who felt like your missing piece was never meant to complete you. They were meant to remind you you've been whole all along. And this brings us to one of the most misunderstood but most liberating truths Jung uncovered. Destined connections don't exist to bring us eternal happiness. They exist to bring us into alignment with our true self. Let that sink in for a moment, because our culture teaches us that love is about finding the one who makes us feel safe and secure forever. But Jungian psychology flips that idea on its head. The deepest relationships are not the ones that soothe our every wound. They're the ones that expose our wounds and walk beside us as we heal them. That's what individuation looks like in relationship. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real. Real enough to stop blaming the other person for your triggers and start owning them. Real enough to see your partner not just as a lover, but as a reflection. Real enough to love someone not because they fill your emptiness, but because they help you remember your fullness. This is the path of conscious relationship. It's not easy, it's not always beautiful, but it's sacred. And here's the final truth. Not everyone gets to experience a connection like this. But if you do, you'll never forget it. Even if it ends, even if you never speak again, even if they become a ghost in your story. Because once someone touches your soul at that depth, they don't just pass through your life. They reshape it. They leave fingerprints on your growth. Their energy gets woven into your becoming. And somewhere, in the quiet of your heart, a part of you will always whisper, "I met someone once, and nothing was ever the same again." So far, we've explored how destined connections awaken us, challenge us, and initiate the journey of individuation. But there's still one question lingering in the background, one that refuses to go away. No matter how much we try to explain it rationally, why do these connections feel timeless? Why does it feel like you've known this person forever, even if you just met? Why does it feel like the bond exists outside of time, before words, before reason, before memory? This is where we step into the deepest layer of Jung's work, the collective unconscious. Jung described the collective unconscious as the foundational layer of the human psyche, a vast, shared reservoir of images, patterns, and energies that all humans carry, regardless of culture or background. It's the source of archetypes like the mother, the hero, the shadow, and yes, the divine couple. But it's more than just a library of symbols. The collective unconscious connects us across time. It carries not only universal themes, but also what Jung called ancestral memory, psychological patterns passed down through generations. When we meet someone and feel that instant sense of familiarity, that unshakable knowing, it may be because we're not just meeting them in the present. We're connecting through layers of the past, through inherited memory, through energies, seeking completion. It's like your soul remembers something your mind has no language for. This is why destined connections can feel less like getting to know someone, and more like remembering them. As if you've played out this story before, as if your souls met in a previous lifetime, or perhaps in a symbolic space beyond time, where all potentialities exist. Now, Jung wasn't dogmatic about reincarnation. He wasn't trying to convince people of literal past lives, but he acknowledged something profound. The unconscious does not experience time the way consciousness does. To the unconscious, past, present, and future are not distinct. Everything is happening now. Everything is alive. This timelessness explains why these connections persist long after the relationship ends, why someone you haven't seen in years can still live in your dreams, why you can feel their presence in moments of silence, why, even in their absence, they feel present. It also explains something else, synchronicity. Jung coined this term to describe meaningful coincidences, those strange, magical moments when life seems to conspire to bring two people together against all odds. You think of someone, and they call. You bump into them on a random street in a city neither of you lives in. You feel a pull to go somewhere, and there they are. Synchronicity isn't about causality. It's about connection between your inner world and the outer world, between your psyche and the unfolding of events. When a destined connection is active, synchronicities often multiply. It's as if the boundary between the personal and the cosmic becomes thinner, more permeable, as if the universe itself is helping orchestrate the encounter. And in a way, it is. Because according to Jung, when the collective unconscious is activated, when something archetypal is moving, the whole psyche begins to shift. And that shift ripples into the outer world, bending reality in ways that defy logic. It's why destined connections often have a storybook quality to them, not in the sense of perfection, but in their mythic structure. They don't feel like accidents. They feel like chapters in a sacred narrative. And at the center of that narrative is one of the most powerful symbols in all of Jungian psychology, the sacred marriage, or hieros gamos. This isn't about marriage in the legal or romantic sense. It's about the union of opposites, masculine and feminine, light and shadow, spirit and matter, vulnerability and strength. The sacred marriage is an inner event, a psychic alchemy, where the fragmented parts of the self come together to form something whole. But in destined connections, that inner event gets mirrored between two people. Each one holds a key to the other's wholeness, not because they complete each other, but because they help each other remember their own completeness. They are living out the archetype. They are becoming the vessel for integration. And here's what's truly astonishing. This process doesn't just affect the two people involved. It radiates outward. When two individuals commit to conscious connection, to facing their shadows, reclaiming their projections, and walking the path of transformation, they create something larger than themselves. The relationship itself becomes an entity, a third presence, with its own energy, its own consciousness. This relationship as entity becomes a force that impacts families, communities, and even the collective psyche. It challenges old patterns. It shifts generational dynamics. It makes visible what was once hidden. It's the kind of love that doesn't just change your life. It changes the lives around you. And that brings us to one of the most important and often misunderstood truths Jung left us with. Destined connections are not about eternal romance. They're about eternal evolution. Their purpose is not to make you happy. It's to make you whole. And that wholeness isn't about perfection. It's about integration. Of your light, of your darkness, of your needs, of your gifts, of the parts of you you've spent a lifetime denying. These connections are here to wake you up, to crack open your defenses, to shine a light into your unconscious, and say, look, this is who you really are. And once that light is turned on, you can't go back to sleep, even if the connection ends, even if you never see them again. Because once two souls recognize each other at that depth, something permanent is created, a psychic thread, a bridge that spans space and time. And whether or not the relationship continues, the work it began continues inside you. You carry it forward, in your choices, in your healing, in the way you love others, in the way you love yourself. And here's the most beautiful part. Destined connections don't complete you. They reveal that you were never incomplete. Through their mirror, you discover the hidden chambers of your own heart. Through the fire of their love and the ache of their absence, you uncover the truth of who you really are. Not someone broken, waiting to be fixed, but someone whole, remembering your fullness, one reflection at a time. So if you've felt that kind of connection, if you've met someone who seemed to shift the axis of your inner world, trust that it wasn't just an experience. It was a turning point. And whether they stayed or left, whether it ended in joy or heartbreak, they served their purpose. They walked with you for a while, on your path to wholeness. And even if it was just for a moment, that moment was eternal. If this video resonated with you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. And if you're on your own journey of soul-deep connection, individuation, or healing, you're not alone. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the psyche, the heart, and the beautiful mystery that lies between. Thanks for walking with me through this. Until next time, stay awake and stay whole.